Minecraft has been around for the longest of times, and there's obviously been some updates that are better than the rest. However, as of late, we are seeing a slow decline in the quality of the new updates being released, and there's been a lot of negative feedback going around on social media. So what happened? Why has the community slowly lost interest in the updates Mojang has been releasing, and why has their quality declined all of a sudden? Now, to start off, we would have to go all the way back to June 2017, when 1.12 came out. Mojang already had all the community on them for a string of very bad updates coming out after they were bought by Microsoft, in the form of 1.9, the combat update, also known as the most controversial update of all time, 1.10, a very nothing update, and 1.11, which, while it brought in stuff that would be useful for later updates, people didn't really like it by that point because they simply didn't like how Mojang was managing the game. After this, 1.12 was rolled around and named the World of Color update, and again, it didn't add that much stuff. Mojang was getting flamed left and right by the community by this point, and the only thing left to try was to give people something different and try to make updates that fill the criteria of the stuff the community had been asking for. In July 2018, Mojang would finally release an update loved by all of the community, in the form of the update Aquatic. It finally brought a new swimming system, waterlogging, tridents, drowns, underwater ruins, conduits, and was overall a pretty fresh version that changed the course of the next few updates. After this, Mojang had a streak of versions that were received well in the community. 1.14, they added new villages, raids, a new trading system, and overall gave us one of the most overpowered versions of the game. 1.15, they added peace, and in 1.16, they added what many consider the best update in Minecraft history in the form of the Nether update. After all of this, Mojang had a really good project, and aside from that, the game was getting popular once again thanks to PewDiePie, who had just started to play the game once again. So there were a lot of people flooding into the game, and there was a certain green blob that would slowly but surely turn the community into something way bigger with his own project. And yes, I am talking about Dream and the Dream SMP. While many people do not really like his personality or simply did not like the Dream SMP, I do have to admit that this is one of the most important parts for Mojang, as this brought in a lot of people that would surely stay in the game if they started releasing a lot of new updates. So Mojang decided to announce a very ambitious project, the Cave update. The community had been asking for this for a long time, as the usual caves you could find in the game were rather empty feeling. After many years of the community asking for it, Mojang finally announced it on the 3rd of October of 2020, only 3 months after releasing arguably the most ambitious update the game had seen already. As you may know, however, certain viruses started affecting the whole world this same year, meaning many of Mojang's plans had already been delayed, but they didn't expect how much it would actually affect them to just leave all those plans in one same update. On the 14th of April of 2021, Mojang announced a change to the Caves and Cliffs update, with it now being split into two parts, 1.17 and 1.18. They said this was in order to prioritize the experience of the players and not release a buggy update or one that was missing a bunch of the content they promised. Although this didn't seem like much of a problem at first, this is the point in which a spiral would begin that would end up with Mojang always under-delivering with their newer updates, and it came with a lot of promises that would slowly but surely get broken by Mojang. On the 8th of June of 2021, 1.17 was released. It came with only a couple of items from what Mojang had originally announced being obtainable in survival, aside from adding axolotls, glow squids, and goats, but those were pretty much useless. They didn't add a lot of items. Although certain other blocks like Deep Slate had already been added, you couldn't actually obtain them in survival, since this version was missing the most important part of the cave update and what people mostly wanted, the new cave generation. Almost half a year later, on the 30th of November of 2021, 1.18 was released, and it was a big step up from what 1.17 was, but it wasn't fully complete. Mojang announced that one of the most important parts of the update, being the Warden, its own biome, and its own structure, were going to be delayed to 1.19 for time reasons and not wanting to delay 1.19 any further. Now we do need to consider that 1.18 was a very special case. 1.17 had been released on June of 2021, and 1.18 got released in November of 2021, while usually most of the updates are released 1 year after the first one that had been released. This was not the case here because they wanted to release it quickly. However, in exchange of that, they had to cut a lot of the content and pass it on to 1.19. Now 1.18 came with a new world generation which allowed for taller mountains and for caves that could be found below Y level 0. Although Mojang had finally released what you could call the cave update they promised, it wasn't even a fully complete one yet. The community seemed rather okay with this, but problems started when Mojang took a lot of time to actually release 1.19, and the biggest problem was how disappointing the update itself was. After multiple months of development, 1.19 came with barely enough content to fit into one update, and this underwhelmed a lot of the community. It barely added anything, pretty much just adding the Warden, the Deep Dark biome, and frogs, but that doesn't really do a lot. This made a lot of people upset at Mojang, and this is where the problems really began. After 1.19 started getting a lot of negative feedback, 1.20 had to be good in order for Mojang to actually earn the players' trust again. Development started, but the first couple of things that were going to be added didn't seem to be very likable. Mojang had started announcing certain items like the new bamboo building blocks, and after this, they announced a new biome, the cherry blossom biome. Now, this is a really good moment to direct your attention to something that seems like a constant addition to all these Minecraft updates. These cute little additions that don't actually help in any way, shape, or form for the actual gameplay. While yes, the game is heavily focused around building, the problem is many of these additions are either way too hard to find for no reason at all, or they are simply a bit too underwhelming when they're actually released. It happens almost every single update with a certain thing that just gets a lot of people talking about at first, but then it dies down very quickly once it's actually released. Examples of this could be the conduits for 1.13, the leather horse armor in 1.14, bees in 1.15, and many others for old versions really. Take for example the conduit. While at first it seems like a really nice item to have, it lets you breathe underwater, you have underwater haste you could call it, but the thing is the radius is so small that it's not worth it most of the time. It's way too hard to obtain. The leather horse armor in 1.14 is a really good example of when an item is just underwhelming. At first, I saw a lot of people that were talking about it and saying like, oh, you know, this looks really cool. But the thing is, you also have diamond horse armor, which is much more worth to get because you can just get it anywhere pretty much in any type of chest. And at the same time, it's much more useful because your horse is going to take more hits. But at the same time, horses themselves are useless. You barely ever use a horse after you're in a certain point of the game. Elytras just render any of these additions of movement completely useless. And well, bees in 1.15 is a good example of when you don't need that much of one same item. I do understand that honey is useful for redstone builds, but the thing is you don't need like industrial mounts for most of these. So that's kind of the big problem with many of these additions. At the same time, many of these additions come from the mob vote. Now, in 2017, Minecraft started doing something called the mob vote, in which you would be given a certain group of mobs, and between all of the community, people would be able to pick one of them, voting for a certain mob, and then this is going to get added, right? That's a really cool concept, but the problem arises when there are really no big additions in the same update. They could have simply added all of them. Now in the first mob vote, we actually got what many people would consider to be the worst mob in Minecraft right now, which is the Phantom. Now I personally do agree the Phantom is completely useless, and the only thing it has going for it is that it can fly. But at the same time, it came with an addition that people could consider cool, but it's rendered useless again. The one drop that Phantoms have is Phantom main brains. Now, these can be useful for slow fall potions, but do you really ever make any of these? And then you have gotten them for Elytras. You can repair your Elytras with these, but they are also useless for that because you can so easily just get mending. That's kind of the big problem with these certain things. There are simply other items that do it better, or certain enchantments that do these things better. And at the same time, because there are some times, like the 1.17 mob vote, in which a really useless mob is added. In this case, the 1.17 or the 2020 mob vote had the Moo Bloom, the Isolager, and the Glow Squid, from which out of the three, I would say the Isolager is the coolest one, but the Glow Squid got added into the game instead. People voted for it, and you know, it had a really decent share of votes, which is kind of the thing here. In the end, if this is the mob that gets added, that's because that's the mob that got the most votes. But when you look at the percentages, it won with only a 52.7% compared to the Isolager having 47.3% between those two. So it barely had more votes, and yet it won. Now, the big problem is that these mobs don't do a lot. The Isolager was a cool hostile mob that would have like cool animations, but that's about it. And the Glow Squid, on the other hand, well, it drops glow ink sacks, which are one of the most useless items in the entire game. Literally, they could have just given the same functions to glowstone dust as an example. That would have been much better. I'm not going to go into the Dream stuff for this one, because a lot of people would consider this one to be rigged, because Dream said that he was going to follow the people that voted for it, something like that. But I don't think that's really the problem. Really, it just comes down to Mojang not wanting to add all of the mobs, and then we end up with one very useless mob. I see that a lot of people argue that it would be pretty bad to just be getting that many mobs, but I don't think it's that bad. I honestly think that it would be even better that way, if we were just getting a constant stream of new mobs. Now, 1.20 also had its own super useless mob in the form of the Sniffer, which is the prime example of when they have a good direction of what they want to add, but they simply don't evolve these ideas. Now, the Sniffer, first of all, is one of the hardest mobs to find in the game, if not just straight up the hardest and dumbest one. Now, in 1.20, we got the Archaeology update, in which you are now able to use a brush to look inside of suspicious gravel and suspicious sand. And here you can get the Sniffer egg. Now, the problem starts from the fact that you can only get the Sniffer egg from a very specific type of ruin, the Warm Ocean ruin. Now, aside from that, the chances of you actually getting it are very low already. But let's say that you get it. Then you need to wait all the time until it actually grows, and the Sniffer just gives you two different types of plants. It gives you torch flowers, and it can also give you pitcher pods. Now, these two plants, I guess, look cool, and they look very nice compared to all the others, but is it really that worth it? Like, really the only reason you would have to get a Sniffer is to do advancements. And I personally do enjoy doing them, but not if they're super tedious. That just makes them bad. And that's why I think that the Sniffer is like the first one in which people really started ganging up on Mojang and saying, wow, this sucks. And right now, the Armadillo is going to be added, another mob that just doesn't really do a lot. It just gives you wolf armor, and I don't think that's that good. But all of the mobs were realistically pretty bad. The Penguin didn't really do a lot, and the Crab would give you, I guess, a decent buff, but it's not that noticeable in the end. So yeah, I think that's really where the problem comes from with mob votes. They are rendered useless most of the time, and when they actually do get a lot of people talking about it, most of the time something dumb ends up happening. Now, after all of this blabbering that I've done so far, I would like to give like a little bit of a talk about why I think Mojang just really hasn't been pumping out good updates as of late. Now, I think, again, it all comes down to them releasing stuff that is just rendered useless by other things that you can get after this point in the game, and not updating the things that people actually want. But most of the time, it just feels lazy. That's the biggest problem. Most of these updates feel lazy and so incomplete for what they are actually announcing. As an example, the Trails update, the 1.20 update, right? In my opinion, is one of the worst we have gotten, if not the worst, straight up, in the Minecraft era. after Mojang was bought by Microsoft, it just feels so useless and so boring. I have not had any updates that I just feel like, wow, this is super boring. Because most of the time they're pretty decent. They add a couple of things. But this one, trail ruins are so bad. And I don't even understand why add them if they are going to be rendered so useless. Like, ooh, you can make pots, which don't even look that great in the first place. You cannot decorate them further than just craft them and place them somewhere. That's really bad design. And, you know, the sniffer, again, is one of my least favorite mobs. In my opinion, it's one of the dumbest mobs to get. And aside from that, a very useless one. I think really we would just have to hope that 1.21 is going to be a perfect update, because there's nothing else we can really do by this point. We just have to hope that 1.21 is almost perfect and that it can actually bring people back into the game, because otherwise Mojang is pretty much just going to die down slowly, and I do not want that to happen. Minecraft is one of my favorite games, but man, it actually just feels like Mojang does not care about the game. So yeah, I would hope that it goes better. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, I guess. I don't really know. And yeah, see you guys another time.